Last session, and we're basically, I've skipped 13 slides on brain science and stuff to just bring it up to an idea where we can talk about how do systems change, or some of the work that we're doing around systems change. And just to take you through that, I'm going to take you through just an example of what we did with another little guy. And this has to do with effort-induced cortical reorganization, but that's just a big brain science thing that says you do some work and help the child learn. The pre-intervention description by the school of this young guy was that he had learning difficulties, he had attention deficits, he had compulsive behaviors and thoughts, poor social skills, and he was at the moment being referred out of mainstream to special school in my area. And at risk of major self-concept issues. And when I say major self-concept issues, he's 6 years old. I sat down with him to test his reading, and he said to me, "Darrell, I want to kill myself. My brain can't figure out reading." You know, it sort of pretty much blew my brain away, thinking, my goodness, here's a boy, he just can't figure out reading, and he's able to cognate that this is putting him at huge social risk, feeling the way that he felt. So we did some things, and so I want to go over what it is that we did, just to show you that he had absolutely massive potentiation, that he came in at year 1.5 level, and these data are over 1.5 to 1.7, and as you can see, he went from 1.7 word attack to 4.3 overall from year 1, didn't have reading skills or just entry level, to 2.7. So it wasn't the fact that he couldn't learn to read, but he'd gone through pre-primary. He was held back in pre-primary, if you can believe, and then year 1, and he just knew that he wasn't getting it, and he couldn't quite figure it out. And I said to Liam, the boy's name, I said, "Liam, this isn't your fault. This is not your fault at all. There's a secret code to reading. Has anybody taught you the secret code?" And he was like, oh. There's a code? And so we went about teaching the secret code of reading, basically to engage him. But post-intervention, as you can see, was quite easy, but he was also at quite intense risk. At post-intervention, he was no longer classified as having learning difficulties, able to maintain attention for required learning, much better eye contact, more socially accepted, still has compulsive thoughts. By the end of the year, he'd won the most improved student, reading and math, and his school, for me, I felt a bit humbled by it, but they brought me into the school and said that, you know, basically the work that we'd done to assist the school to change and figure out how to deal with this issue had made them feel that they were better teachers, and that they felt that they had almost cost this boy. A year later, this is a family that had moved, so they moved in from the Goldfields into Bunbury so they could get closer to get some assistance. And so the family had split because the father was a minor. And he was working out there, so it had split the family. Now they're living together. The boy, a year later, won the state SciTech award, and the family's been able to be reunited. And here he is writing his first children's book. He decided that he wanted to write a children's book, so his sister didn't go through the same problems that he went through. So that was his sort of outcome from it. He decided that what he wanted to do was to help others. So what does Hattie say about all this? And Bob's already introduced you to Hattie, so I'm not going to say too much more than it's an absolutely mammoth study, together with Manzaro and Bob's own meta-analysis, probably the 3 core huge meta-analysis that anybody would really want to know about, everything you need to know about education. So we looked at what worked. So if you look at what works in terms of effect size, and fortunately Bob's already gone over that, so I won't have to say it, what we looked at was to stop labeling him. So they were trying to say, oh, does he have autism spectrum disorder? Is he this? Is he that? Where is he on the spectrum? And can we get some more testing done? And I said, what's that testing going to result in? Is it going to actually tell you how to teach him to read? No, it wasn't going to. So let's just forego the labeling process for at least a while and see where we can get with that. We started reconnecting him with his friends. And so we worked on some peer tutoring. And then we worked on cooperative rather than individualized instruction. He was being pulled out for individualized instruction, and so we got him back into cooperative learning groups. And we started enriching the feedback that he was given. All of these things, as you can see between the 2 arrows, are just trying to make it a sort of a range. the range of 0.5 to somewhere 0.73. Very powerful sort of things. So if you use Hattie as a Bible, you say, there are things within there that if you look at what's going on in a classroom and you want to change the things that are going on in the classroom, these are some of the things that you begin to look at. And if you want to change your colleagues in terms of what works, and you want to say, why inclusion? Well, these are some of the pieces of inclusion. Say, these are better teaching, as known by our teaching profession. So we added another aspect known to have high effect, and it was noted by Carlson, an Australian researcher, among those that have not yet mentioned here, and that's a building strong belonging between the teacher and the student. So this was an EA-student relationship, and we changed that to a student-child relationship. So the teacher took the charge of this boy's learning and took charge of what was happening. It didn't mean that she didn't continue to use the EA, we just looked at doing it in a different way because the old way had shown us that it wasn't showing enough power. How can we use that to inform decisions? We then added another piece, which was parents and direct teaching of reading. Okay, so you get parents teaching reading, or sorry, parents listening to kids reading. I think it has a 0.5 effect, quite high. But if you look at it, parents directly teaching their kids to read, this is one of the most powerful techniques that we use in the projects that we're involved with. So Andrew's been involved with it, Michelle's been involved with it, everybody that ever gets involved with me, Mina, who was involved here, another family that was involved here. What's one of the first things that we do? Not because of anything other than the fact that reading is a central piece of what we call education. And if you can read, it has many other flow-on factors other than being able to access information in terms of your self-esteem, in terms of other people viewing you. If they view you as a reader, we're working with a young guy who has Down syndrome. We taught him to read before he went to school. He went in and started reading the things on the board, and the teacher was like, oh my goodness, well, maybe he doesn't have Down syndrome. So yes, he still has Down syndrome, but it changed the relationship in terms of thinking of him as a learner as opposed to a child who has special needs that's going to need this or that or another thing. So these are some of the strategies that we use to, in a sense, look at saying we don't see special education or teaching of direct teaching of reading as a this or that. In other words, this, you pull him out and give him direct teaching of reading, or he gets inclusion. We look at that as a this and that. Mom and Dad do this at home, and we do this at school. We do inclusion at school. We don't do the same program at home and at school, because lots of families ask me that too. If we do that at home, can we do it at school? No, you can't do it at school. You can't do it at school because you need a different experience at school. You need a socially immersion in school. You need to learn lots of other things besides reading. Of course, you can use reading as a piece of the vehicle. As Andrew explained in the situation of his daughter, now the reading is a vehicle for her self-esteem. She now feels like she's a tutor. She's tutoring another child because she learned to read. And the reason that she learned to read is because Andrew taught her to read. This was not good. This was, everything that was Andrew was told about his daughter, reading was not on the list of things that they thought she was going to be capable of. And yet now she's reading to grade level and tutoring another student. So how can we use that information to inform decisions? We used, I think I showed you this one. Okay, parent direct teaching versus listening to homework. I won't need to go over that one. Add to this independent review based on our development of the thesis, and this is called Formative Evaluation. So this is one of the things that Carlson and most of the people that look at Hattie's work say is missing. So I think this is in the Australian Journal of Special Education. Carlson, and I can't remember who else is in it, but I can get you the reference. Bob probably has the reference. But Carlson basically said when he looked at what was happening in our classrooms around the country, he could find lots of examples of the things that Hattie rated as high, but he couldn't find many examples of formative evaluation. So formative evaluation, we link to professional development. And what does that mean from the way we do it? It means observation in the classroom, having a look at that, do micro-teaching, take the role of the EA, using video and verbal feedback. As you can see with the examples that Michelle is giving. Video, lots of the video is being actually used by the EAs to provide information to the family. But this isn't just sort of like a communication book to go home. This is used as formative work in which to say, what do we do next? How do we build on what we've got? Oh, I'm seeing that. Here's some ideas. How do we build this? And so you get this flow back and forth. And so this video-verbal feedback is something that's so poorly often used and so expertly used in that example. And then, of course, practice at that. So what do we look for in our formative evaluation? So we're looking at these in terms of the pieces of the triangle. So we're looking at peer tutoring under the socio-curricular aspect. We're looking at reciprocal teaching. We're looking at cooperative versus individualized instruction. We're looking at feedback. Look at the high levels of those in terms of effect size. Curricular, we're looking at comprehensive interventions, sort of not just a piecemeal thing, but again, as exemplified in Michelle's examples, just across the board, looking at every aspect of his. Spaced versus mass practice. This is another one of the things that, unfortunately, so much of the work that's done with our kids who have labels is we get these spaced practice things. The basic therapy model is a dysfunctional model. It comes into our school or comes into our homes once a fortnight or twice a fortnight for a block of 10 weeks, and then it doesn't do anything. Okay? That's, you know, it's nice and it's a useful resource, but you need spaced practice over time if you're going to teach your brain that this is important and you need to use it all the time. And so if you don't have something that's going to be used all the time, then it has a much less potent effect. Under curricular, modeled, self-question, direct instruction, and looking at, of course, much lower, actually, time on task, but looking at what tasks the kids are doing. So expectation, self-expectation of a success, so looking at how does the child feel about himself? Does he or she think they're successful? And so these are one of the things that if you're looking at kids and saying, how, like with Liam now, I ask Liam, I go, what do you think about your reading? I'm the top student. You know, I'm very good. Before, he was at such a low ebb, you know, that he didn't think that he wanted to live. But now, he's feeling so successful that it has a very, very high effect. Feedback again, no labeling. Look at that one again. I really, really have to question this one so much. Because this is Hattie's finding, not giving labels has a positive effect size of 0.61. That's higher than almost 3/4 of the things that we do in classrooms. And yet label is the very first thing we do. We go out and search for that label. And yet if we didn't, if we just dealt with it as if it were a developmental issue, yes, this child has these conditions, these are the effects of it is on this child, we would probably have a much more powerful effect. Parent expectations, very high. Teacher expectations, very high. Challenging goals, so setting those expectations, having those normative expectations, and then playing around with them and trying to get them. Peer effect of friendships, so we can't underpin that either. Look at the power of just having friends. So if you think, oh, social inclusion, that's all it's about, it doesn't have any effect, well, it has a huge effect, and self-concept. Students, according to Hattie, derive a sense of self and reputation among their peers once they're learners. He also said, if you want to increase student academic achievement, give each student a friend. And so inclusion is about that. Friendship is not only a powerful base of well-being, it facilitates a sense of school belonging. So those are just a few of the sort of researchy based things that we're talking about in terms of inclusive education. I'll talk to those points further after Andrew talks about what's going on at his school.
So this is the last night, 10:30. The first one was the morning talk that we did. Obviously took up all the time, but this is the last night 10:30 presentation. Is that the one?
Set yourself up for success.
I set myself up for success. I think what they say, create low expectations and make the opposite side from what we're trying to encourage you. So again, probably for the new people here. Oh man, so there's some funny things going on here. Not that one. Right. Okay. No, it is okay. Just I'll give you, for the new teachers and new people who've joined us, I'll just give you a quick bit of background. We started off my daughter's primary school. She's year 3 now. And we started off kind of falling into an education support unit just because we did a fair bit of research and we couldn't really find any reason not to go anywhere else. It was government school, that's where the resources were, so that's where they could teach a child like mine, which is kind of words that's been used in the past. And so we went to this school, but she had a couple of years of kindy and pre-primary of just mainstreaming, which went reasonably well. I mean, wasn't perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but it was okay. We then went to a segregated, we were forced basically into the segregation side of things, and we thought for a minute, hang on, is this the right thing? But the arguments that were presented to us basically saying, we can't support you in mainstream and this is the place where she should be, this is where we'll get the best results, convinced us to kind of stick with it for the time being. But luckily, having had this this experience in the early years in kindy and pre-primary kind of made us realise that things were not great. She was actually going backwards. She was losing a lot of the friends, the normal developing peer friendships that she made in pre-primary and kindy. They were basically vanishing within a term. They were gone. She was losing speech, which is a relative strength of hers. And so we started looking at something different. We stumbled upon Bob Jackson and PLEDG, and these guys gave us the evidence, presented the evidence to us, and essentially we decided to make a shift. It's not easy. I think there's anyone who's gone through this journey or who's going through this journey, it's not the easy path that you're taking. It's hard work. It's the hard path. But we do it because we believe in the outcomes and we believe in our children and their potential. And so what I'm just going to tell you a little bit about is once we've made this decision to change, just some of the things that we were looking at and how we were trying to build these partnerships with our teachers and the school that we identified and the various bits and pieces. I don't think it's any of it's rocket science. I have gone through over it this morning already. But just to give you kind of a bit of a summary of what we looked at. So I think the first thing that whenever you go and look for a school or try out a school or talk to a school, you speak to principals, obviously, or if you can get access to them. Some you can't. We have had a couple of schools where they've just gone, no, sorry, registrar, you can't talk to the principal, unfortunately, and we gave that. Obviously, that's not a necessarily good sign, but we were looking for. We had some experience with principals previously, and so we wanted to go and have a look and find a principal that would be on board, because I think something that these guys have taught us is that if you've got a principal who's on board generally and who's got the will and believes in all the ability to teach all children, even the skill might not be with the teachers yet, but that skill will follow if you've got that high-level backup. Now, that's not always easy to find. You often have the inverse. You've got teachers with amazing skill, but a principal who goes, no, we shouldn't really bother. We shouldn't have this child in our school. But that's kind of what we were looking for, and that's lucky that we stumbled upon that very close to our house. We had this guy, David, and he had this really kind of blasé, kind of sit back in his chair, and we kind of went in and explained to him that where we're coming from. And he's like, my teachers are the best teachers around. They can teach anyone. And we were just, okay, so you don't really want to know much more? Or he just went, no, that's, we'll do the applications for funding and those kind of things, but, come in, let's have a go. And that is a very rare and a pretty amazing thing for us to have stumbled upon. And I guess that was early on, that was a very, very good sign. They had in the school a culture already of not a one-size-fits-all approach. So they've got, it's quite funny, we seem to get all the kids from the local, now in the school, we get all the kids from the local government schools or other private schools, and they're all the kids that are actually, a lot of them are really smart, but they just don't fit into that box that the teachers want them to fit in. And so they come there, and then all of a sudden the individual differences are celebrated and recognised, and these kids are thriving. So there was never a one-size-fits-all approach. there was clearly quite a bit of diversity, and that we got the sense from the principal that the values that there was the values were actually there was value. The differences were valued. There was also in this school, which is kind of unheard of, I guess, in a lot of schools, there was also this culture of welcoming parents as partners. And before we knew about Hattie or anything like that, we in our previous schools, in our previous arrangements, we'd been very much pushed to the outside, and not so much as I don't think we see ourselves as helicopter parents at all. But when you've got a vulnerable child, there's no the normal assessments that go through for reports and those kind of things that parents get sent through, and where they can assess how their child's doing compared to the kind of baseline, those things don't make it back. You don't have that kind of system. And so I think a parent who really values and wants to know how their child is progressing, how their child is getting on in the class, and whether they're happy or not happy, you've got to have that sense of involvement. You've got to be able to be allowed to make those inquiries and have that access to teachers. And so we moved into this school. It didn't have special education, and it didn't have a history of special education, but it had a history of values, really. And so very early on, we defined the fact that we had these conversations with the teachers, and Darrell as a partner in helping us transition, that we expected Sophia to be included physically, curricularly, and we believe that the social part will follow. We weren't interested in, we kind of made quite a bit of a concerted effort to not kind of shop the label around. She's got this, because essentially what happens then is the teacher goes and researches the label. They go, oh, well, this kid can't do maths, which is what my child's label says. So she's not supposed to be able to do maths at all. And so, all of a sudden you get in the classroom and everybody else is doing maths, and she's over there sitting there kind of, I don't know, playing a game on the iPad or something like that. And you go, hang on, that's not the... And so we wanted to do away with these little... with these barriers that stopped her social inclusion. And obviously we had that expectation that we wanted to be parents. We needed to be partners in this education. And we also said to this teacher that, with all the means that we have, or with whatever means we have, we will do whatever it takes. We're extremely... this is obviously a very important thing for us, and we'll help at home. We'll do peer tutoring. We'll do whatever it takes to help get her included. And we were obviously lucky enough to have Darrell as a resource to help the teacher in terms of transitioning my daughter into this inclusive class. The other thing that I think is often missed, and as my daughter who's now in year 3, we've kind of probably had the quickest turnover or settling period in the new year that we've ever had, was the building the capacity of the EA and clearly defining the EA's role. Now, we early on with the principal in particular, we said we want the EA to be a class resource. We believe that the teacher's responsibility is to teach our daughter. And again, it's that perception, a child who's got an adult strapped to them 24/7 is viewed differently by a different child. So we had that kind of clearly define that role. And so it's been a process of educating the EA. We were lucky to have, we don't have a full-time EA, it's only partial, but what we wanted to use her optimally, and we've been lucky to actually have her stick with us through the entire time that Soph's been in this class. And so to start off with, that certainly, that's what she knew. This EA was on top of Soph, kind of helping her and doing the things for her. And eventually, as things settled, and Darrell gave her a few, came into the class here and there and gave them some tips and helped them out a bit, and gave them some ideas on how you can do differently. Maybe use the kids as resources to help include Sophia and help keep her on task. All of a sudden, the EA managed to withdraw a bit, and the EA now spends time with everybody. and the teacher, and she's essentially freed up time for the teacher to come and spend time with Soph. And if there's a little bit of extra time that the teacher wants to spend with Sophia, that's available, because the EA is used as a class resource. And so she's doing a lot of the things the teacher might normally do, but help in terms of admin-y kind of stuff, but really trying to free up that time.
Could you stop there?
Yeah.
So in terms of structural change, this is it's a big issue. Lots of beautiful writers around this, but EAs are they're another one of these structures that we got passed forward. It was in our states, if you want to know the history. Kim Walker-Beaumont did a deal with the education department and did the deal with the teachers union to allow kids to come into the classroom. He was going to give them so much aid time. And it was at the time, you guys are all too young to remember, but it was at the time when we used to have tea ladies, and they were all ladies, and we used to have bus drivers that were employed by the department. Okay? And the department decided, well, we're going to restructure this, and it was going to be open contracts and contract out. Well, one day you were the tea lady, the next day you were an EA. That's what happened, is that we just reconverted, we restructured. It had nothing to do with a group of people sitting down and saying, what's the best way that we could restructure to do inclusive education? This was like, what can we do to restructure a group of people who are employed at this role to get them employed at this role, and then meet somebody else's complaint over here, which was for, we need more aid time if you're going to actually ask us to have these kids in our classroom. Okay, so that wasn't really a technical reason why we did it. That was just a political reason why we did it. Now, that history is carried forward, and so we still have it. Now, I'm not saying anything against, I love it. I love having extra hands and warm bodies in my classroom. Okay, there's nothing wrong with that. It's just that the structure wasn't designed specifically for the role that it's filled. Okay, so we're in a sense retrofitting, sort of like you have a house and you forgot to put in the toilet. Now you've got to come in and bring plumbers in and retrofit your house so that it has a loo or an accessible loo. And this is what we're constantly doing in the departments and in all structures, is retrofitting it. And so when we retrofit the role of EA, one of the things we have to do is to work with that EA to say, your role, your job description is not around Sophia. Your job description, I'm going to be coming in and having a look at you, and the more that you're not working with her, the better off I'm going to be reporting to everybody about how wonderful a job that you're doing. Whoa, what? Away from her. So yeah, if she gets too much help, then she's going to learn helplessness. So it's a real art to get in there, give just the amount of help she needs, or get somebody else to do the help that's even more sophisticated. So it's really a restructuring of that role to let them know that it's okay not to be sitting next to this child. In actual fact, it's not very okay if you are sitting next to him. And if you've structured it so that you got her at the back of the classroom with you and her at a desk all by yourself, you definitely don't have it structured up correctly. That you're basically created a segregated classroom within a regular classroom. So we want her to be dead set in the middle. We want her to be hard for you to get to. But we want to also then teach her things like, when you need help, what do? Do you just go, or do you act, oh, I'm tired? Or do you actually put up your hand? Okay? If you put up your hand, that's what all the other kids are supposed to do. And so those are the things that are allowed if you take this sort of a redefining approach. Sorry, Andrew.
No, that's good. And I guess something that we've learned, as I mentioned now just before, we don't have a full-time EA. I think we barely have half-time EA. But because we're using her optimally, compared to the value that she's brought into the classroom compared to when she was in the segregated, and even in mainstream and kindy, back in kindy and pre-primary, back in mainstream before we did segregation education, there she had a full-time aide, and the value of this part-time aide now is way outstrips anything else because we're using her optimally. So, a lot of people make a lot of noise about the resources. My experience, my personal experience is that an EA is a resource and they can help, but it's not the be-all and end-all. So when Sophia started in class, there were one or two incidents of where things weren't, she was kind of oblivious to it, but mum and dad picked those things up, and they were quite, hurtful for us. And we had a chat to the teacher, and the teacher quite quickly recognized the need for teaching social skills to the entire group. And so she started from a very, basically within week 2, she was really talking about social values and valuing diversity and how are you different from you and how are you different from her and what are these differences and is that more valuable than that? No. And so I touched on it earlier this morning, but it built a really coherent group of year ones. And it went from the one class through to the other class, where they were really encouraged to look after each other in the playground. If you see a friend over there, one of your classmates, and they're sitting by themselves, how about you go and ask them if they want to come and play or join your group? And so they did that quite effectively.
Can I just interject? So Lisa, who was the year 1 teacher, and she would actually give awards when kids came back from play, saying, oh, I caught you being nice to Zoot, well done. So she was catching them being good, catching them doing it, not just around the child with impairment, but with each other. So creating a whole culture of inclusion, and that it was the right thing to do to look after one another, and to be nice to one another, and to respect one another.
Yeah. And Sophia actually came back with don't think if you know if you've seen it, but Sophia came back last week with a little certificate that she got that someone nominated her for a kindness award. So they still have got that culture going into the class in year 3, where one of the boys basically, I can't remember what she did, I'm not quite sure what she did, but she basically put him, gave up a space or something so that he can do something, and he was really impressed by that. And that it doesn't just extend to the other children and their perception of Sophia, it also extends to Sophia making those adjustments and sometimes putting other people in front of her too. And so through the tutoring, which Darrell touched on previously, we were able to quite quickly upskill Sophie, because she was starting basically from a pretty low base, and we were similarly able to get her quite close to year level, or reading at about actually having the year level capacity, but speed is probably the one thing that we're still working on, and that's actually getting a lot better too at the moment, I should tell you about. But again, when Sophia came into the classroom and she was able to recognise letters and have strategies to sound out words, the other kids kind of went, wow, how does she know that? And so all of a sudden she went from this kind of vulnerable, kind of maybe a little bit different, they don't feel a bit uneasy, and going, hang on, she knows stuff. And they were actually asking the teacher to be grouped with her during spelling lessons or reading lessons, because she had a strategy to figure things out. So they kind of cottoned on to the fact that, hang on, that one's got some strategies. I better hang out with that one so that I can so that it can help me through my lesson. And as I mentioned previously, the EA really building that capacity has served us in very good stead. She's now with Sophia in year 3, and we've had a very quick transition where Sophia was trying to pull kind of her little disinterested, I don't really feel like doing this anymore, and she's got the sweetest little smile, and she can, it's just outrageous to say, kind of be firm with her. She makes it really hard, but quite quickly the EA mentioned to the teacher, well, hang on, no, you can actually try, you can get a bit more out of her. And the teacher kind of goes, oh, really? And she pushes her just that little bit further. And within 3 or 4 weeks, all of a sudden, having had this body of knowledge that's gone across the years, the teachers kind of recognize the fact that, hang on, this kid's actually got a hell of a lot more capacity than what she showed me to start off with, even though, despite all the handover from the previous year's teacher and all those things, it got demonstrated in the class very quickly. And so it's been a really, really quick transition and a very successful start to the year, I think. My daughter's really musical, and so we started focusing on music as building her capacity in reading music and developing those talents. And we've got this really gorgeous music teacher who comes into the school and does music tuition with her. And we used, again, that partnership. So it was us as parents and the EA and the teacher and Darrell, that we were able to use this music teacher who was just really open. She was doing musicianship classes with Sophia at school. And so she was doing them one-on-one, and they've got a lot of music tuition in the school. The kids go out for their music class and they come back. And so we said to Danielle, look, are you willing to maybe every few weeks do a class with 2 kids? And so Soph can choose a kind of, I think it was a rewards-based system that they set up. So it was kind of maybe that was around
So there were two basic goals. One was we wanted Sophia to have an experience with a peer where the peer saw her as having a skill stronger than their skill. Okay? And we knew that Sophia was very strong there, so she always wasn't the weakest one in the group. And secondly, that it was viewed as, oh, this is an honor to get to be going on this sort of thing.
Yeah.
But to build those social, personal relationships, because oftentimes you can get sort of casual relationships, but you don't get deep and meaningful friendship until you spend some decent amount of time together. Yeah. So that's the way it was structured.
And so again, I guess this music teacher came on board and really helped facilitate the social inclusion. There was like a kind of a incentive in the class, a little bit of a reward. And when you got picked to go into this, you should see these classes. It's madness. It's jumping and dancing and crazy. And it was quite a lovely thing to be chosen to go to this class. And then we also did she was also willing to do a full class, take everybody and Sophia. And Sophia was obviously in her element because she knew exactly what was going on. She knew all the cues. She jumped and sang and danced and her way through the class. And the other kids could see her in that environment where she was really, really strong and excelling in. And I think, again, that's kind of, just that picture of who this child is. It really built up. Not for the teacher and the parents and the partners, but the way the kids viewed her and the way she then views herself. And then I think Michelle earlier on touched on that, but I think parents are very quick to criticise when things aren't going right, and very quick to. But we've kind of made a point of spending more time praising and writing letters of kind of goodwill and to the principals of letters of encouragement and telling how wonderful things are and how wonderful this teacher is doing, or good, when there's good things that happen, to really make those points and really enforce those points, because those things relay back to the teachers, and you essentially build up that partnership, that feeling of we're a coherent group and we're working towards something special. And then lastly, in our school community, we kind of had to dragging my wife, kicking and screaming a little bit, because she's not a particularly sociable person, and I'm only just. But we've had to kind of become fairly active parents and fairly social, and whenever there's a busy bee or something, we're in there, we're working, we're participating in the school events. And I, the year we moved schools, I went onto the school council, which was pretty hard work, but again, we built up built up a really good rapport with some of the teachers and some of the certainly the principal again, and the people, some of the other parents, and it was really kind of strengthening those ties within the school community, and then communication with other parents and really kind of reaching out to other parents. I think. It was a pretty funny story. We've got not funny story, and this is more or less where I'll end. We've got one of our chickens. It's not a very good chicken. So she used to be a pretty good chicken. She used to lay eggs, and she used to be kind of quite good. But then we had a hawk that attacked her, and she stopped laying eggs. And now we've got 2 new chickens that's coming, and she's very protective of her spot in the pecking order, which was number 4. We had 4 to start off with, 2 new ones, and so she's chasing these new chickens around. And I was talking to my daughter yesterday, and at the dining table, and we were talking about. She said, "Well, Popcorn's not a very good chicken, is she?" And I went, "No, she isn't a very good chicken, but you've got some insight into what happened. We're also quick to judge people, and we sum people up just like that. But said to Lily, you know the history, you know the circumstances why Popcorn wasn't always a bad chicken. She's now not a particularly great chicken, but you have an understanding of what's the background." And I think for a lot of parents, I think we're often quick to judge a child or a tantrum or something like that. But the moment you actually reach out and you put yourself out there and you actually communicate with parents and teachers and understand those circumstances, I think that's when you very quickly build up that understanding and that compassion. And I think that's a particularly valuable lesson as you go through school and you get more and more support.
In that that in some ways is one of the most powerful groups in support of your child with disability. If another parent of a regular child without a disability comes in on your support, that changes the attitude massively. So if you can actually get someone to actually go to the principal and say, I really think it was terrific having this here in my class, that has an enormous effect on the school. The principal's quite often thinking, oh, what are the other parents going to think? So it's actually quite a strategy that if you can pull it off, it's actually very powerful.
Come on. Got to close that up.
Just a couple of other things about that. We spend a lot of our time trying to change schools. And one of the key things we've learned is just positive. You know, that praise.
You're building bridges, not trying to tear them down, basically.
You know, think about why do you change? Do you change by people being negative to you or people being positive to you? It's just it's common sense, but it's very hard when you're bitter or you've seen nasty things happening to your child. But obviously, you can build on that positive. Now, letters are massively important, not even emails. Letters. Because a principal gets a letter, they've got to do something with it. It's got to go somewhere. Emails sort of just get forgotten, or they go on to, they're not like ditch one out these days, but basically emails can disappear. A letter almost always ends up in a file. Or a letter will be taken down to the teacher and said, look, I've got this lovely letter about you. Massively powerful. And those of you that are teachers, I bet you if you've had a letter from a parent, you remember it. Is that true? I've had teachers have one for 10 years. This letter that some parent who actually took the trouble to actually write the letter. So again, if you've got a good principal, you write to the regional director, you write to the school board. It's a good teacher, you write to the principal. It's a good school, maybe talk to the whole organisation. Always positive, always saying what they've done well. And that's what we find is that starts to change the culture, that you're less of a threat as a parent, and you start to build these partnerships, which is what Andrew was saying.
Fantastic. So, coming back to the questions that you posed, what Andrew was exemplifying here is something that we've spent 4 decades studying and trying to figure out. And it's how do you change a system from outside the system, okay? We're outside the system because I used to be inside the system. I was an educator. And then I took on this mission to spend a 5-year project to bring inclusive education to Western Australia. And my goodness, that was 1979 or something. No, 1978 when I started projects. Obviously, I learned a big lesson that things don't change in 5-year plans. It takes a whole lifetime, and it's going to take 2 or 3 more lifetimes. It's going to be a generation past a fully included generation before it now becomes the habit. That's how I view it in terms of time scale. But one of the biggest things that we looked at from outside was what is the right relationship by starting with what's the current relationship. So if you're looking inside, if you're inside the school, what is the relationship between parents and teachers? What is it? Us and them? What is it? What is it in law? What's the relationship between parents and teachers in law? That you are not the parent of your child during the school hours. School, you don't voluntarily give your child up to the school as you would to a babysitter or someone looking after your child. That's called loco parentis under the law. It's a requirement by the state to deliver your child unto the system, which creates, I'm not saying that that's wrong in the sense of having, public education. It's just that the relationship is one built on, again, and it goes way back to the beginnings of the structure of education, where the relationship was, these nasty parents, they're probably not going to deliver their children, so we better write it into law that they were required to. Well, that set up some sort of an adversarial sort of thing that we forgot about the law that's related to it, and we forgot about the relationship. But in a sense, it's created, and it's at least one of the pieces of the puzzle of adversarial. So if you're a school and you want to look at building a new way forward, you're going to have to think of a new way forward of having a relationship with parents. You're going to have to say, how is it that I can meet them halfway? What's it look like when a parent comes to your case conferences about the child? What happens? They walk into your year 2 and 3 classroom. What happens? What have you been doing all day? Teaching year 2 and 3s. Yeah? And they now sit in a year 2 and 3 chair across from you. And so what's your role still going to be? You've been 6.5 hours of teaching. 4-year-olds, 6, 8, 9, 10-year-olds. Okay? Now all of a sudden here's a couple of parents in there, and they're a little bit bigger than the other kids that are sitting in the chair. But in a sense, your frame of mind, your brain, the brain sciences, you're unconsciously still in a sense of, we're here and you're here, and we're going to talk to you this way. So, if you want to change that relationship, one of the things that I suggest that we do is practice not meeting in the classroom. Practice meeting somewhere else. And in actual fact, if you really want to push yourself hard, go meet them at home. I'm working with a lady who's a medical doctor, and we're going to be talking about her son. And so I said, how about if we meet after school, and Natalie's going to make some afternoon tea, and we'll just meet around her kitchen table. And the teacher was, oh, great, afternoon tea. Come around to your house, sit down. And she sat down at the table, and I said, Dr. Chalice, what is it you'd like to do around your son? And the teacher was like, oh, you're a doctor? See, this parent hadn't recognized the fact that this is a medical doctor. Oh, my goodness. Now there are 2 professional people with both professional knowledge talking about the relationship around this child. It wasn't one having more knowledge or less knowledge or whatever. It was 2 adults. And so getting 2 adults in the room talking on the same page is one of the first things that I look at, is how do I get 2 adults talking or 4 adults talking instead of some adults talking to children or acting like children or acting like parents, if you go with that old TA stuff. That's a big, huge structural piece for me, is to get the right relationship between parents and teachers, because these are the 2 senior partners in this child's life. The parents, after you've done your 192 days and your 6.5 hours, you may never see that child again. Well, you will see him next year, but you don't have the responsibility for this child. That parent did that amount of hours before the child was 2, 1, in terms of overall hours. And if it's a vulnerable child, a child with impairment, they're probably going to have a longer responsibility. So their responsibility is massive in terms of that. But parents don't always have huge educational backgrounds, and so you're the expert on your classroom. You're the expert on the other 26 or 7 or hopefully only 14 or 15 warm bodies that are in your classroom, plus this child. And so you're going, okay, I'm the expert on these, and they're the expert on this child. Now, how do we get those 2 levels of expertise interacting in a way that has potency, that's relevant to them and powerful for us in moving forward? And so that's something that people haven't really, I don't think, thought through, and they don't think about that when they're doing an IEP meeting or when they're doing a planning meeting. They're just thinking, okay, how many have I got in 16 minutes? And they're going to come in, and I need to get these 16 objectives written down in the paper, and I need to get that out, and my principal needs to have it by, ooh, the very first thing I need to do is develop a relationship. Who is this guy, Andrew? Who is his wife? What do they need? What does their daughter need? How do they view their child? So Michelle's thing of her vision of Devon and Andrew's this morning of his vision of what life looked like, that's a very important first starter. So instead of saying, this is what we're going to do with your child, saying, what's your vision? What do you see? What do you see as the best thing that we can do with and for your child this term? What are the 2 or 3 big things that you want me to tackle as an educator? And then you can try to figure out whether you can actually do it or not, but at least you're starting from a point of view of saying, okay, you're a valued person. I want to know who you are. I want to know what it is that you're looking at. And then also not making too many assumptions that they don't already are doing something. So one of the things, again, in our projects, we're seeing that we have to do this thing, and it's not a matter of have to in a negative way, but we're seeing a period of time where we need to do this and that. I need to show parents how kids learn to read, how kids learn to do math, how kids learn to spell, how kids learn to write and construct sentences. And I'm not trying to do it to take teachers' jobs away. I'm doing it to try to show parents, this is the learning processes that your daughter is going to be required in this setting over here. And so if you can figure out what she knows, you're going to be a valuable source of information for that teacher. And then if the teacher can value that and say, Andrew, I'm getting that feedback, or Michelle, I'm getting that feedback, and that feedback's, now I don't have to go to 100 different links to do it. I can just say, okay, now let's see if I can get it in my setting. And sometimes you won't. And that tells you what? That tells you, we need to think about this. It's not generalizing between home and school. Which strategy, why is that strategy working there? It's not working here. Okay, let's work on that. I want to get it working here. If it's working there, if it's working here and it's not working there, I want to get it working across settings, because both of those settings are critical settings. Not one is more important than the other. Both of those settings are equally powerful to the development of this child. Okay? So those are the right relationships in those regards. We talked a few bits about the right relationships in terms of EAs. But another piece of the puzzle in terms of formative evaluation for this school, and we don't know whether we're going to get there because everything we do is all voluntary. People can take us or leave us. And it's sort of a good thing, because that means that people can listen to me and then they can go, okay, see you later. Don't have to listen to what you had to say. But if it has to be valuable, otherwise they're not going to listen. One of the things that we're going to be looking at is saying, okay, this notion of an EA following this child through, there's some great, as Andrew laid it out, some great positivity to that. There's also a downside. This is the only person that knows her that intimately. Okay? So one of the things that I would see is after the teacher, so this is the EA bringing the next teacher up to speed, in a sense. Getting her up to speed. Don't take any of these away. Now we need to take that EA from a structural point of view. If you're any principals in the room, if you're a principal point of view, I say, okay, right, Glenda, Mandy, Mel, have you got it together yet? Yes, okay. Now I'm going to take one of my young EAs and let you mentor with Glenda to figure out how to do it. And then I'm going to pull Glenda and take her into a more challenging situation, because she's pretty darn good now and she's got some great skill. And now I need to structure it properly so that her talents are now addressed at a more difficult issue and something that challenges her a little bit more, and so that we can work on continuing her enhanced skill, but seeing her as a senior and a sort of a career path. See, we don't have that for EAs. It's sort of like everybody's there. We need this career path thinking not just for their career, but in a saying, now we've got a senior person in the school that's got the idea, they got it, that any EA who's having difficulties can go there as their first source of assistance. They don't have to go outside. They don't have to go to some center. They don't have to come to me. They don't have to go. They have their own internal network that they can sort through. They get to a point where Glenda goes, don't know. Contact Darrell, contact Andrew, contact somebody, and then that's when that's called in. I think we need to really develop that role of EA and that progression onward, because it's, we're having to relearn it every year. And it's just really, really hard that it takes you a term. It takes you 2 terms to get up to speed, and we should be up to speed from day one. Specialists. What's the right role of specialists? What I say to teachers after they meet me the first time is, I'm here as long as you want me to be here, and I'm not here if you don't want me to be here. You're the senior partner. You choose me. You choose the psychologist. You choose the speech therapist. You choose people based on what you and the family see as what fits for you guys, what advice. And so if I come in or if I phone up and say, oh, look, I'd like to come and see you, and they'll say, they may say to me, thanks, but no thanks. So, okay, right. They've made a decision. I'm happy about that. No, I'm brokenhearted if they don't want me, but I'm happy that they've seen it's okay to say no. Because what happens to teachers and parents? We've heard a lot of stories about parents, but we haven't heard stories from teachers about you get conflicting advice. Everything from do this all the way across the spectrum to do this. They go, oh, if I did this, all the speech therapists did this, and this guy said to do this, this person said to do this. I'm running around like a chook, one of Andrew's chooks, chasing my tail, because I'm taking all these advice instead of saying, hang on, I'm the senior teacher in this whole thing. I need to be making these decisions. He's made a good case. He's given me the research evidence. Okay, I'll go with that. I'll see how that works. What do you think, parents? Yep, let's go with that. All right, you two make the determination that this is the plan that you're going to go for, because at the end of the day, you're it for the next 192 days. You're it. You're going to have to live with the decisions of the specialists that you bring in to advise you. And those specialists, there's lots of specialists out there, lots of us who are specialists. I wouldn't, like I said, I'd be heartbroken if you said, don't invite me in. But at the same time, I would also be very, very pleased that you'd made that decision, that what I had to say didn't fit with the way you want to deal with this issue, and you've got agreement with the family who I'm involved with. It's going to make some difficulties there, but at the same time, I'm also going to be going, great, they've made the decisions. I'm not the person to make the decision, and no specialist is the person to make the decision. The doctor doesn't come in and teach your class. The therapist, OT, doesn't come in and teach your class. You teach that class. So you have to be making those sorts of things. Does that make sense?